And it's the great difficulty of being prescient, like Erickson, who was prescient. There were plenty of therapists around who were prescient, and were later proved to be idiots. So it's really cool when you find that your prescience has relevance. And I think, and certainly the way I've been approaching and getting more and more in the context of, is that if we are looking at what is natural, and if we take the idea that anything that's beneficial, anything that has an effect on us, that has some impact, is because it's natural. And if it's natural, meaning it's been around for a long, long time. I've said a few times, but I'll just allude quickly when I talk about mindfulness. I mean, there's this idea of stopping what you're doing, seeing something numinous and wonderful, getting a sense of awe and inspiration, and then stopping and engaging with others and eating and so on and so forth. We've been doing forever at sunset. And so this has been the natural process. So, and I often say, well, we don't need mindfulness. What we need to do is we need to get mindfulness back. So then the question is not how to get mindfulness. That's easy. We do that with a few practices and we do some things and start looking at sunsets. Now we need to ask the question of, why did we lose it? Why did we give it away? Where did we give it away? And it's interesting. I mean, Dan Siegel, lovely friend of mine's coming out with, done a lot with mindfulness. His new book coming out very shortly called Aware. And I love it. And it's brilliant and he'll take us a long way, but I'm looking forward to talking to him and saying, yeah, but this awareness, and it's good for us, means we've been doing it for a long, long time. What has been the things that have interfered with our awareness? And there's lots of discussions, social discussions and psychological discussions and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about hypnotism, what is hypnotism? Hypnotism is something that we have been doing for millennia and more, as a natural way of bringing us into a place where we can have some engagement between mind and body. Okay. What we see is that a lot of this is something that's very similar to what happens in dreams, what happens at night. But it's not. It's something that we can do in the day. But then we have daydreams. And there's lots of fabulous knowledge, the default mode system in the brain, which is a midline sort of set of processes that take on and shut everything else out. At nighttime, we have a slight dissociation from our motor cortex. So we have that beautiful and soporific, more philosophical capacity at 2 o'clock in the morning. And this wonderful thing of focused attention, taking you into a space where it allows your body to uninhibitedly move more towards well-being, is really useful. Now, what we found, of course, just as we have with so many other things, is that state, that hypnotic state, can also be shifted and moved and manipulated and nefariously acted with and damagingly acted with. So I can put you into a hypnotic state where you open up all these things, give you a suggestion, and then you'll embarrassingly behave like a chicken later on, partly through your own cooperation, but your implicit cooperation. And similarly with mindfulness, there are a lot of people finding themselves actually becoming very uninspired and disinterested in anything other than the present moment, and very scared. We have heightened anxiety, so they're missing the wholeness of where we go by isolating these elements. So when I had the green square, we went to the red and the yellow. It's beautiful to explore the possibilities of the red and yellow. And hopefully what we do when we explore those is shift the yellow color and shift the red color. So when we come back together, we don't get the green mental health or mental problem in higher education square. And it's something else. But therapies are all too often elements of natural life, observed, noticed, isolated, heightened, but then restricted. And so then we talk, I do a bit of this, I do a bit of that, and do a bit of other thing. And it's like saying a cake, that you could have a cake that's just got a little silo of flour and a silo of sugar and a silo of salt and a silo of whatever, of water, and an egg just sort of sitting there. What we call that is something that isn't mixed yet. And it is scary as a therapist to start the mixer and not know where it's going. I do appreciate that. But it's scarier if you have no appreciation of the fact that between your system and the client's system, that there are ways that there is a movement towards well-being. And when it's not moving towards well-being, it's actually quite obvious. And responses can assist that. And that's part of the trick.
I think there's something we've mentioned but not explicitly, which is the fact that no therapy is better or worse than any other therapy, it seems.
And the evidence is that there's a growing amount of evidence to that.
And that the bits that are more important are, does the therapist believe in the therapy they're practicing? What's the relationship? All these things are far more important than the specifics of the therapy, which I think is a brilliant thing for therapists, because it means there is the variety that you can develop your own style. And so if you're someone that prefers one thing versus another type of way of working, like I'm not a particularly authoritarian kind of person, so I wouldn't want to work in a style that's very, you will do this and you will do that. That just wouldn't be me. But that also means the kind of clients that resonate towards me wouldn't be the clients who want that kind of a style from their therapist. So I quite like this idea that, and this is something about like the principles we talked about of there's underlying principles that are why these things work, not the specific bunch of techniques that you call CBT or bunch of techniques that you call that version of hypnosis, this version of hypnosis, that therapy, this therapy. It's more about, well, they're underlying principles, and as long as you're pretty much hitting them and that you're asking for feedback and getting checked out by your own clients about how you seem to be doing, and hopefully checking yourself out as well, and not just arrogantly thinking, I obviously did a great job, they never came back. When actually none of them ever come back. They all go to the therapist down the road after they've seen you. So as long as you're doing these things, then you can kind of end up doing your own style. And I know that has some implications, especially in some parts of the world where everything is about someone having to use insurance to pay for therapy rather than privately.
This
it's
like,
is oh no, you've got to have this, that, and the other, and the insurance companies want it rigid, even if the research is pointing
towards something else. Well, the insurance companies are still in the literal and linear systems. I mean, it was interesting they're saying the underlying principles of how it works, and it's even more in the thinking in the systems that the underlying principles are what enable the system to function successfully. And it's so extraordinary. We've talked about I've talked about in the book, the birds, the starlings all flying around, and there's just 4 or 5 principles. I do this, and I did this with various groups, giving them a felt sense of organizing systems. And I do the thing of crossing the road, because it's extraordinary when you look at it. Cars are in an organized system, lights and so on and so forth. But then with pedestrians, it just goes green and they just all go, and suddenly they all end up on the other side. And I said, what are the organizing principles that you need in order for this to function? And we do various things, adding one rule at a time until it all works. And it basically comes down, walk towards the other side of the road. If you come across an obstruction, step to the left or to the right and swivel. That's it. And we have to add another one now. Don't look at your bloody phone. So the next thing. But if the dance that we sometimes do when we come, where we're both doing the same things, but what breaks down there is the swivel. And we get stuck in the moving left and right. And so you get this understanding that there are attractors in the system that are fixed and that actually causes problems. Now, they're different from the things that come in to actually disrupt us, and the falcons and things that come in to actually blow everything away. But we actually set up things, and these are lifestyle patterns and automatic thoughts and emotional memories and things. And they can be cyclic. It's quite fascinating watching a group of people and you set up two attractors at either end and say, move towards one of the attractors, and when you arrive at it, you are then repelled and you wish to go towards the other attractor. And that they will form exactly the same pattern that computer models do. And then if you say to a whole group, just walk around, neither repelled nor drawn to anybody, staying equidistant and wandering, and it suddenly forms this beautiful chaotic attractor, just like the stuff Lorenz showed us in the maths. So there are these natural principles and natural flows. And when we're working with another person, I don't think we've yet got to an understanding of how much we don't need to do or how much we do need to do. I think we're moving towards, we've had a lot of work on what we do need to do, and we've overdone it. Now we've got a bit more of a move towards what we don't need to do. So let's not do anything. Let's just sit. And I don't want mirroring hands to be sold as something where the therapist does nothing. Therapist does a lot, but the therapist does a lot of what the therapist needs to do without being at the expense of the client. And that trick of, when I do something, is it enhancing, is it facilitating, or is it preoccupying the client's own private work? And frankly, that takes years. And it doesn't, you don't need to be a therapist to do it, but it takes years. And some of these natural frames, and this is why the language styles that we talk about in the book, that Ernest's been talking about a long time, they're actually much simpler. Although they do come from Erickson, the Times with Erickson. And in fact, which you've got them, I know, in your bookshelf. I think I just did it. The Exploratory Case book.
I've got all of them.
Volume 11 of the thing. So there's quite a big section on the language styles, and I recognize quite a few of the things that we use in mirroring hands. But we've refined a lot of them down, reduced a lot. There's sort of like, that's not necessary. There's a lot of the confusion work that Erickson does in a sort of a directive way. I think that a lot of it's old now. It was useful at the time, but now we can be much more sophisticated. And I mean, to say to someone, I wonder if one of your hands is heavier than the other. Well, that's pretty confusing. For a start, it's curious, but it's like, and I wonder if that hand will move almost all by itself, and it does. Whoa. Now, I absolutely agree, though, that sometimes you've got someone really annoying. I mean, the client I describe in the introduction of the book, where she said she knew everything and she'd heard everything from every therapist, and there was nothing I could tell her that was any good. And so when she demanded that, what are you doing? I just said to her, I don't know. And she said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, you said you know everything and there's nothing I could do, so I'm just trying stuff that I don't even know what I'm doing. And it was amazing. She had given me the contract for that. She looked at me and she just said, okay, and went back to the work.
But Erickson had the case where the person, he didn't know what to do, so he just sat there in silence until they opened their eyes again. Yeah. And when they opened their eyes, they said, I don't remember you saying or doing anything. I said, that's right, you don't remember me saying or doing anything. But you must have said or done something. That's right, I must have said or done something. But what did you do? I know, what did I do? And then they went home and got better.
Yeah.
Something must have happened. I must have had an experience. It was like, well, I just sat there silently.
Yeah. And as you say, it's that enormously difficult thing now of confining therapeutic processes of practice in timeframes, in locations, in relationships to insurance companies, to agencies. And I think a lot of the work that I see Scott Miller doing, which is terrific, and Darryl Chow and some of the others, David Prescott, is within the framework of therapy as delivered in agencies. And so I'm not going to sit around arguing about agencies should or shouldn't do it the way they do it. But I would have preferred, we were saying something before, if only things hadn't started, like if you want to get better, don't start from here. So we do need to gradually shift people away. But I think in private practice, we can begin to learn these techniques of engagement. We can discover, and I know one of the questions we were talking about before, and I alluded to it a little bit with the migraines, but almost all biological functions can have some impact from the mind. And our best example that shows us that mind to body has a strong impact is when we look at DID, the dissociative identity disorders. And the most extraordinary case that I read about was one in New York some years ago. And one personality had diabetes and the other one didn't. So the alteration to the DNA, to the gene expression, to the protein synthesis, to all that stuff is extremely possible and extremely dramatic. There just is no linear processes that we can put a lot of reliability on. There are linear processes within complex systems. There are closed systems within open systems. There's all that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, we'll never know, be able to direct. It's one of my favorite ones on mindfulness. A friend who did a mindfulness group years ago when it was very new with with the board of this company, because they needed to get them all centered. At the end of his sessions, 2 of the board resigned because they thought, this is stupid, I don't want to be in this game. So he thought, oh dear, I think I'm not going to be invited back. So 2 or 3 years later, he got an invitation to come back. And he went, oh, that's a bit surprising, but because last time 2 members of the board resigned, I thought you'd be happy. He said, yeah, that's right. But it's okay. This time we know which members of the board we want to go. So if you could get them. And it's sort of like, wow. So this is the stick. This is the wrong end of the stick we've got. If we can just produce enough effective therapy so that with our agency, so that enough people get better, so that we can justify getting our funds, then everything will be well. But it's the catch-22 of the more you try to do it, exactly as we were saying before. If I tried to induce someone to do very little movement but feel like they had a lot, that's the thing that is actually going to cause the situation to dysfunction. Now, it certainly is important to have brought that naturalness and that natural thing into conscious awareness, but then settled it back down into implicit again, just like a musician. Someone was saying, why learn neuroscience? Because it's all just neurobabble and it's not what it's about. And I get that. And to some degree, I agree with that. To some not, because I think there's some very useful things that I can use at the time. But what it is, just like a musician, I learn the scale not so that when I'm playing I can say, now I'm going to do this scale. I learn the scale so that fraction or some elements of that scale will emerge as self-organized, spontaneously into the improvisation. And afterwards I go, oh, look, I did a double bind. Oh, look, I did an incomplete sentence. And so the curiosity, but it's really all sitting on the sensitivity. If you're sensitive and you're sensitively observing the client, you're not saying anything. You're allowing the client to work.